Okay, Amy, there's a lot going on here. We've got weight concerns, junk food, high cholesterol, nutrition, all this stuff. And I don't even know where to begin, but I know that we need to begin with you telling us a little bit about yourself and your work. So why don't we start there?
So I'm a dietitian. I'm based in Cincinnati, Ohio. I work at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, but I'm also a spokesperson for the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And one of my areas of expertise is adolescent nutrition. I have been a pediatric dietitian for 23 years, and that includes adolescents. So that's a little bit about me. And I have a husband and 2 boys, and we like to be active. We like to go on vacation. So
Yay, we're back to vacationing. When we did our pregame, we wanted to figure out where to begin because there really is a lot. I know I said it tongue in cheek, but there is a lot. So we decided we'll begin with the Dietary Guidelines. So tell us a little bit about that.
So the U.S. Dietary Guidelines, they are revised or updated every 5 years. And it's basically a collaboration between the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the United States Department of Agriculture. And basically, it's what it is a blueprint for how we should try to eat, how we should strive to eat, the important things to consider. It is basically published and made for like health and nutrition professionals, but it is our job to then break down that information for the public to let the public know this is what you need to know about it. Some exciting things from the latest one, which is the U.S. Dietary Guidelines for 2020 to 2025. Can't believe it's almost 2020. It'll be 2023. So there'll be time to do it again here in a couple of years. Is this time they did it, they published a lot of the information by life stage. And so I'm going to focus a lot on what they said about the adolescents. The other big takeaway from it is they focus on healthy dietary pattern and trying to get nutrient dense foods. So there was 4 main guidelines for everybody, no matter what life stage you are in. The guidelines for the first time this year also included not the first time. I think it was the first time since 1980 something. I can't remember right now. But they included guidelines for ages 0 to 2, which is a big deal because we really haven't had guidelines for that age group in a while. But as far as like for the entire public, the guidelines are, first one is follow a healthy dietary pattern at every stage of life. And the point of that being is that it's never too late to start eating healthy. Like just because you're 60 years old and let's say you've had McDonald's every day, it's okay to figure out something else. It's not too late. Nothing's too late. And I made some notes here, so that's why I'm referring to them occasionally. The guideline 2 is customize and enjoy choices that reflect your personal preference and culture. So you don't want to, gone are the days of saying, meat and potatoes, because that's the American way. Any culture's diet can fit into the dietary guidelines. And the guidelines 3 is focusing on meeting food group needs with nutrient-dense foods. So the example of a nutrient-dense food is a food that's going to give you a lot of vitamins, a lot of minerals, maybe fiber, things like that. So they gave some pictorial examples. If you look through the USDA document for the dietary guidelines, one of them would be like, so you know how kids love the highly sugar sweetened yogurts that come in bright colors? Well, the recommendation for that is how to make that more nutrient dense would be to maybe do a lower sugar or a plain yogurt and add fresh fruit, because then you're going to get fiber from the fresh fruit. You're going to get more vitamins and minerals from the fruit, and you're going to have less sugar from the yogurt. So that's just an example of making something nutrient dense. And then the 4th guideline was limiting food and beverages that are high in added sugar, sodium, and saturated fat, and limit alcohol. So yes, they do address alcohol. We don't necessarily think of it for the adolescent age group, but that is, something to think about eventually as they age and to talk about. But for adults, they definitely say, limit alcohol. I think it's maybe like 1 drink per day or something like that. So I didn't really look into it that much since I'm focusing on adolescents, but some people don't like to hear that, but yes, it's part of the dietary guidelines. So those are the 4 guidelines of it. So if you have any questions for me about that, I can talk about that. And then I can go on a little bit about adolescents. So
let's go ahead and talk about adolescents.
Okay. So They do include, so the big thing about this is one of the things they do to judge the quality of the diet that they report on in the Dietary Guidelines is they use something called the Healthy Eating Index. The Healthy Eating Index is kind of like a scoring tool that's a lot of times used for research purposes, where they may take diet histories from lots of different people, and then they will score those diet histories based on the quality of the food. Basically, the closer you are to 100, that's like the perfect diet. The farther you're away from 100, that's a little less than optimal, a healthy dietary pattern. So they do this for like every age range that they cover in the Dietary Guidelines. And to no surprise, the teenagers have the lowest healthy eating index of 51. So it is above 50, but and I believe some of the older age groups are in the 60s. So nobody's close to 100, but they are the lowest at 51. And I would say that's indicative of a couple different things. One, I think it's indicative of the fact that teenagers are gaining independence. They're away from their home more often. They're choosing more of their own food. And I know I found this with my own kids. I always felt they ate pretty well. I mean, I'm a dietitian, so I always served them really good foods, and they never seemed to complain. But kind of like once they hit that teenage years, it's kind of like, no, mom, like I am not going to eat like that, because nobody takes that to lunch at school. So that peer pressure starts to come in a little bit. So it didn't really surprise me, because if you look at it, they like list the age ranges out, and like there's a dip at the teenage years, and then it starts to go back up again. So I do think there's hope that they're going to learn a little bit. I know I always will say something to my kids, like if we are somewhere and they come home and they tell me that they had like 2 ice cream cones and a piece of cake, and then they're like, oh, my stomach hurts. I'll be like, why do you think that is? Like, this is a learning experience. Like, wonder why that is. And so, just kind of talking about that a little bit. So the other thing that's concerning in this age group is that most kids are not meeting their food groups. The only food group teenagers meet is grains, and that's with like not with whole grains. Like they're not getting whole grains. The grains are like from their white bread, their white crackers, their the snack foods, that kind of thing. So really they're lacking, and the concern about that is they're lacking nutrients. And one of the largest concerns is that like when you get the older teenagers, they're like not meeting anything. And the biggest nutrient that's a concern is protein. Like teenage boys are not getting enough protein, and teenage girls are not consuming enough protein, which that's a concern, especially for the girls, because when you think of like a lot of the protein foods, they're going to be high in iron, and then that can lead to iron deficiency. So those are some of the glaring things about it. They also mentioned some nutrients of concern for this age group. And so imagine if none of them that were surveyed are meeting their food group needs. They're probably lacking in a lot of nutrients. But the big ones they're concerned about, one is calcium. And calcium, I do talk to patients about this. I always say when I'm talking to a teenager, I'm like, this is the time in your life where you can actually put it in your bank. I was like, you got to think of your bones like a bank, that you can only make deposits when you're young. And then once you get like in your mid 20s or maybe early 30s, all of a sudden that bank is shut and you can't put any more savings in there. Like that, what you've got is what you have. So that's why you need to eat some of the dairy products or the dairy alternative products, or some of the greens that are higher in calcium, or looking for calcium fortified foods, or even taking a supplement, because this is the only time in your life you're going to be able to bank it. The other one is vitamin D, which is also closely related with calcium and bone health. It improves the absorption. And if you live in a cloudy area of the country like I do, Cincinnati is not really known for a lot of the sun that we have. You might have a higher risk of not having enough vitamin D. We get it from the sun, but what do we do when it's sunny? We put sunblock on, or at least we tell our kids to put sunblock on. But if you put sunblock on, that's going to block the conversion of the active form of vitamin D that we get from the sun. So, and vitamin D really is not that plentiful in a lot of foods. So sometimes you're going to have to get vitamin D from a supplement. And then the other ones that they're concerned about would be potassium, because it's high in a lot of fruits and vegetables. And if kids aren't getting enough fruits and vegetables, they're not getting enough potassium. And then the next one is fiber. So that goes along with the fact no fruits and vegetables, no whole grains. So they're not getting enough fiber. So I assume we probably have a lot of constipated adolescents. That's all I can assume from that.
That That would explain a lot.
Yeah, I know that you're there. That's why they're grumpy all the time. So, the synopsis of the dietary guidelines for teens in that age group. So,
okay, we have Lori says she loves your idea of putting it in the bank. She's going to use it. Me too, Lori. I wrote it down. I was like, I love that.
And the other thing that really helps with bone health is being weight bearing. So like even, like we want them to take calcium rich foods and we want them to have the adequate vitamin D. But the other thing we want them to do is be active because that really helps with your bone development as well.
You mentioned supplements. Can you tell us about supplements? Yay or nay? Are there particular kinds?
Well, as a dietitian, when a family comes to me and says, does my child need a vitamin? I usually kind of go through a checklist in my head. The checklist I go through is I will go through and be like, do they eat foods from all food groups? And if the answer is no, I will say, well, what food groups do they not eat from? And if they're like, oh, well, they'll eat any meat, but they won't eat any fruits and vegetables, I'll be like, well, you could probably use a vitamin because there's a lot of vitamins and minerals that come from fruits and vegetables. On kids that maybe eat meat, but they don't eat fruits and vegetables, I'm probably okay with them doing a gummy vitamin. Most gummy vitamins do not have iron in it. And so meats have iron in it. So if you're eating meat, but not fruits and vegetables, a gummy would be okay. But if the answer is they don't eat any meat, they don't eat any protein sources, they're not eating beans, they don't eat greens, like a lot of good sources of iron, then I'll say, well, then they are going to need a different form of vitamin. And so then I would recommend more of a chewable or a swallowable tablet because those are the vitamins that are going to have iron in it. There's some nutrients that are just not stable in the gummy form. And so gummy vitamins are not as complete as a chewable or a tablet.
Good to know. Thank you. I have some questions actually that parents have sent, and I'm going to run through them, make sure that we get to them. If you have additional questions, just put them in the comment section. One is, are there healthy fast food options?
So there can always be something. I will say most fast food restaurants have a healthy option. The matter is will they order it? Because like McDonald's, Wendy's, they all have salads. So you can always order a salad. If a salad is not your kid's thing, you could always like talk to them about just portion sizes. Like rather than a double cheeseburger, do a single cheeseburger. Rather than the large fry, do a small fry. Not doing soda, but doing water. If you have an option to get lettuce and tomato on your sandwich, get lettuce and tomato on your sandwich. So if they're not like, it seems like the go-to fast food option for healthy is a salad. But a lot of times you're eating fast food because you're on the go. If let's say it's a teen that drives, it's kind of hard to eat a salad when you're driving a car. So therefore they're going to go to a sandwich. So then I would be like, okay, how can we make that sandwich healthier? If it's a sub place, subs, usually they have a lot of different vegetables you can put on them. Or they could try to look at the way the meat is cooked. So if it's a grilled chicken as opposed to a fried chicken, that would be something too in a sandwich. So those are just a few tips.
I love those tips. Can caffeine hurt my teen? That's a parent question.
Well, I believe there is some evidence that you don't want them to have over a certain amount of caffeine a day. I am not sure of the milligrams. Can I look that up and get back to you on the milligrams, and then you can share that with your audience? So because the more concern is just because it's a stimulant, and if you drink it, like if a kid is drinking caffeine all day long, that could really mess with their sleep. And we know that teenagers still do need a lot of sleep. Teenage boys, they can grow until they're 21. Teenage girls is not as long, but still the better sleep they have, the better for their mental health. So you don't want them drinking a caffeinated beverage all day long because that could interrupt their sleep. And it also, in some kids, may cause them to be a little anxious, too jittery, that kind of thing. So I wish I had that memorized, but I don't. But yes, there is a recommendation for what not to exceed. And I want to say it's something like no more than like the equivalent of 1 cup of coffee a day. So,
okay.
But I will get back to you on that. I'll make.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Do teens who participate in sports need to consume more calories, and what should their intake be?
Well, I think that depends on the sport that they're in. So, if it's a sport where it's a really active sport, then yes, their calorie intake is going to have to be significantly more than someone else. So, my son is a
Mhm,
swimmer. He burns
mhm.
through calories like nobody's business. But if he was like, let's say, in a sport where maybe he was um, not as active, like swimming,
Mhm,
if you're practicing, you are constantly active in a practice.
mhm.
Some sports, there's a little bit more standing around. And I'm not to say that that doesn't mean they need increased needs, but it's not increased needs like a highly active athlete.
Yep.
And I think it all depends on the kid too. Like if you have a child that has a tendency to be a little bit on the underweight side, then they might need to have a little bit more calories no matter what sport they're playing. But if your
Mhm,
child maybe is a child that lives in a larger body and the sport they play isn't an super active sport, then I
mhm.
don't think you need to necessarily be like, you know, overloading them with calories.
Jessica, who is a Your Teen editor and works behind the scenes, is amazing, and she has found for us. Experts
Mm.
recommend teens get no more than 100 milligrams of caffeine a day, about 1 cup of coffee or 2 caffeinated sodas.
I knew the 1 cup of coffee was in there. So, yes. So, yeah, so probably if they're drinking 2 Starbucks a day, that's probably too much.
Yes,
Because most
yes.
kids gravitate towards that type of drink, whether it's that brand or another brand. So,
Um, this is unusual for me to get all these parent questions ahead of time, so I'm really
oh,
excited about it. But I can wrap some of these up into a, if we ask, well, let's ask this first. How can we tell if our teens are malnourished?
well, first, I would say talk to your primary care provider because your teens should still be charted on a growth chart. We can use growth charts until they're the age of 20.
Okay.
So if they're under 20, they can be on a growth chart. The things
Mhm,
clinically that I look for malnutrition when I'm seeing patients, we look at their weight and their height, how appropriate their weight is for their height, what their
mhm,
BMI is. If the BMI is typically less than the fifth percentile, that qualifies as some degree of malnutrition,
mhm,
depending on the history. If that's always where that kid has been, then I wouldn't call them malnourished because it's kind of like always where their curve has been. Like they've never
mhm,
varied off of it. There's other supporting evidence that you can look at. One would be looking at their physical exam. So, do you see, are there bones protruding, ribs protruding? Like, is it a chronic thing? Is that kind of always how they look, or is this new?
mhm,
Because there's two types of malnutrition, one is chronic and one is acute. Chronic is where you have a child that may chronically not be getting adequate nutrition. And typically, with that, you're going to see a point where their height does not continue to track at the same level as it always has been. So, if your height had
mhm,
been at the 10th, all of a sudden it's going to drop. And that's usually that can be a sign or a symptom of long-term malnutrition. The
mhm,
acute malnutrition, you're going to see more of an acute drop in weight. So
mhm,
that's what you would look for. But I know a lot of times I would have families come because their kids had very limited diets and they would be like, they're malnourished. And I would do a full physical exam, look at the history. And a lot of times I could say, they're not malnourished. Are they not getting the nutrients they need? Yes, but I would not call them malnourished as being
mhm.
underweight at that point in time. So the other thing is if you're concerned about it, you could always ask your primary care provider for a referral to a registered dietitian that works with adolescents. And you can find that on the eatright.org website. If you go under Ask the Find an Expert. So you could find a dietitian in your area.
Great. Thank you. This is all good information. We opened with the fact that teens are increasingly independent. And part of that, which we seldom discuss, is their eating becomes more independent. Either they just refuse to eat certain things or they're just away from us, right? So
Mhm.
we're not making all 3 meals and 2 snacks a day for them like we used to. So, how do parents balance allowing them to make food choices and ensuring that they have receive healthy nutrition?
Well, I would say one of the big things families can do is really make an attempt to do family meals. Because a
Mhm,
lot of times as kids get older, I know it's hard because I have two teen boys. It's hard to keep that family meal, but I would try to do it as much as possible. Evidence show
mhm,
that families that eat meals together, the kids have a higher intake of fruits and vegetables, they have a better variety, overall better mental health because they're sitting down with their family every night. So there's a lot of healthy benefits to eating together as a family that
mhm,
are not related to nutrition, but it definitely does improve nutrition quality. So I would say eating as a family. And then when you're in charge of feeding them, I would be offering them the food you want them to eat. So, if
mhm,
you're like, I know they went out to eat with friends, well, then I'm going to make sure the dinner tonight is something a little bit more well-rounded because they
mhm,
probably didn't get that when they went out with friends.
mhm. Sneak it in if you have to. Let's talk about marketing and media influence on teen and their dietary habits. They're bombarded with images of weight stigmas and concerns and body image. How does that factor, and what can we be doing at home to help counter the negativity associated with it?
Well, I think one is kind of being aware of what your child is looking at on social media.
Mhm, mhm,
Um, and whether that's kind of, you can always peer over their shoulder or just simply asking them,
mhm,
how that's coming up. Another thing is making sure you're modeling a healthy body image for your child. Like I have
mhm,
had clients that I have worked with where the mom or the dad would come in and say, "Oh, we're on a diet." And the child that I would be working with is the same size as the parents. And the
mm,
child looks at their parents and like, well, I think they're fine, but obviously they don't. So if they're dissatisfied with their body, then I must be dissatisfied with mine. Like it's that
mm,
projection. Like if
mhm,
if a child has never seen a parent celebrate their body or accept their
mhm,
body for how it is, they're not taught that they need to celebrate their body and accept the body
mhm,
they have.
mhm, mhm. And
So those would be
it
big
goes
things. Yeah. That's for
that
boys and
goes
girls.
so far.
Mhm.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, are there trends in teen diet habits? If so, what are the current trends?
Well, the current trend, I think, with the pandemic is one, there's a rise in eating disorders, and then there was also a rise in rates of childhood obesity. So
Mhm,
both of them are kind of related to isolation.
mhm,
One, if you're isolated and were inside and you just maybe ate to like
mhm,
soothe yourself or because that was the only activity you had. The other, I
mhm,
think, was more isolation and causing the opposite of maybe, not maybe under eating rather than overeating. And I think too
mhm,
that families were together more. So possibly parents picked up on signs and symptoms of an eating disorder that they never realized before.
mhm. Have I missed anything? What is it that we should know that we may not have covered that parents really should know?
Well, I think one of the things that's kind of getting some traction now in the media is the idea of weight bias and weight stigma, which
Mhm,
is something that can be experienced by children and adults in social settings such as schools,
mhm,
or it can even be experienced, unfortunately, in the healthcare environment. And that's this whole idea. For years, we've had this idea that when somebody is overweight, it is a personal choice. It is due to their personal choices that they are overweight. And it
mhm,
comes down to being calories in and calories out. But we know
mhm,
it's much more than that now. Um,
mhm,
and there's some evidence to show that when we stigmatize somebody based on their weight, it may
mhm,
cause them to not necessarily take care of themselves. It may cause them to not seek medical care. It may
mhm,
delay treatment of certain things. Family, like children, were interviewed that are overweight, and
mhm,
the parents were too, and they said that a lot of times they didn't feel like they were taken seriously when they would go into a care provider because they they were overweight. They were, oh, well, if you would just improve your diet, that's it. And I recently heard somebody give a talk and say, what if we treated every medical ailment like it was that person's fault? What if somebody came in with a burn and say, well, you shouldn't have touched that hot pan. So I'm only going to tell you to go home and try not to touch it again. Like you're going to give them a little bit more treatment than that. So it's more or less remembering that. And then as parents and the outside of the medical field, making sure, like, again, positive body image, making sure you're not talking negatively about someone based on their size, because then that's only teaching your child. And in schools, it is known that weight-based bullying is the most common form of bullying for children. And when they get bullied for their weight, that makes them not want to exercise. It makes them not, it makes them want to withdraw. So those are just things to think about, that children, teens, they come in all different sizes, and we have to accept all those sizes. And we have to really be mindful of how we talk about different body sizes.
Thank you. This was wonderful. You packed so much information in this conversation. As you were talking, Jessica was posting links to the different things that you were referencing. So there's resources for people to access. I always like to wrap this up with, if we remember only one thing from this very packed half hour, what should that one thing be?
I would say to let your children be independent, not worry too much, let them learn from their mistakes, and just be a constant leader in how you want them to lead a healthy lifestyle.
Okay, I love that. It's never too late to start eating healthy.
Nope.
And let them learn by trial and error.
So, this was fun.
This was a lot of fun. Tomorrow we will be back at 10:30 a.m. Eastern time. Tomorrow is Wednesday, and tomorrow will be Coffee with Jen and Sharon, where they'll discuss something pertinent to the parenting of a teen experience. They have a lot of fun doing it. So please join them tomorrow. Bring your own coffee, tea, cocoa, whatever is your beverage of choice, and have fun with Jen and Sharon live tomorrow, 10:30 a.m., same place on our Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, or I'm leaving one out, Twitter accounts. Amy, thank you so much for this information. This is a topic. It's a topic that we don't cover enough, and I appreciate you leading us through it.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.